Welcome to OTT Talks, a series of conversations with think tankers, policymakers, and experts around the world. This episode is part of a series of discussions with European think tank leaders to reflect on the nature of their work in a changing Europe. My name is Enrique Mendizabal, and I am co-hosting this session with Goran Buldioski. Today, we have the honor of having Sonja Stojanovic-Gajic with us, a colleague and friend. But first, Goran, why don't you set the scene for our discussion today?
Thanks, Kike, and welcome, Sonia. We got inspired a bit looking at the state of the think tanks in Central and Eastern Europe, inside the European Union, but also outside in the Western Balkans and the Eastern neighborhood. What we noticed is actually those think tanks were operating in countries that, according to the World Bank, moved from the middle income to the upper middle income. They also operated in countries that struggled with keeping their democracy and further developing. Many of that backslided. And in a way, as they formally became richer, many donors from the rich countries, European Union included, basically either reduce or stop funding for civil society, while at the same time we also noticed that there was no significant domestic support base for evidence-based policy research. And that also inspired us to think, okay, what has transpired in the last 20 years? What kind of different pressures, domestic or international, these countries face on their own economic system, but as well how the think tanks and their leaders dealt with those. That's why we will have this a mini series of interviews. We will interview former and current directors who have led a think tank for almost for 10 years or more. And we would like to learn about the successes and failures as a way to document, and not only to document for our own reason, but as well to share it with a broader community of think tankers that follows on think tanks and the website and the platforms.
Thank you, Goran. So after this introduction to the series, let me welcome our first guest, Sonja Stojanovic-Gajic, former director of Belgrade Centre for Security Policy. Sonja is well known across the region for her leadership, but also as a great observer, helper, and promoter of think tanks and independent evidence-based policy research. Welcome, Sonja.
Good to see you, hear you.
Thank you, Kike. Thank you, Sonia. So let me kick off with a sort of the first kind of a warm-up question. And we expect that colleagues from different parts of the world, those who either lead or follow think tanks, will tune in. And therefore, we would like to start with the political context of the country and the region, Serbia and Western Balkans, where your think tank has worked. As describing the situation of a region or a country will probably require a separate podcast, we suggest we start with a bit of a more lively question. And that is, if you need to describe your country or the Western Balkans as a region, as a movie, as a film, which one would it be?
Okay, for Serbia, I picked Premeditated Murder, which is a Serbian movie. And it talks about the different generations having internal conflicts on which side to join in the Second World War, and then also during transition from communism, what kind of state do you fight for, what kind of rights do you fight for, and with whom. So it's about different identity issues, but also issues of inequality and economic status and political rights linked to it. And I suggest I stop here. It's a love story, so it's not just serious stuff. So watch it, find it on YouTube, and follow through.
Thank you. Good to hear that you can relate your country with a movie about a love story. What about the region, the Western Balkans? A book or a movie that would describe it? Do you have any that comes to your mind?
I mean, there are two movies that come to my mind. One is from before the fall of our common state, Yugoslavia, called How Rock and Roll Failed. and it's more about the different the change of generations, and the young people challenging not just the political system, but also cultural rights and so on. So I think this worldview that Yugoslavia, which consisted most of the Western Balkans, belonged to the West at that point, through this challenging by different generations, is well represented in this movie, which is also full of music and humor, and I highly suggest to watch it. And the other movie, what's the translation in English? I mean, there is No Man's Land, the Bosnian movie, which is very good about the war. There is also uh, Flames Are Burning Well. It's a bad translation, but I'll check. By Srđan Dragović, again, a war movie, but just showing how the close community relationships break easily, and how you end up, fighting, and even if you don't fully approve the cause for fighting, and get engaged in nasty stuff, and how difficult it is to get out of it. So these are the first two movies that come to my mind.
Thank you, Sona. Anything else to add on the context, especially for those of our listeners who may not be so privy with Serbia and Western Balkans? Is that you emphasize, the war, post-war period, equality or inequality? Anything else that maybe was formative for your work or the context in which you operated?
I think the simplest way to explain is to say that I was born, raised, and lived most of my 40+ years life in the same city called Belgrade, the capital of Serbia. But in this lifespan, I've changed 4 countries. So from socialist federal Yugoslavia to now Serbia only. 2 or 3 political regimes. So from very open liberal type of socialism that Yugoslavia had, to formal transition to democracy, and entering into wars with all our neighbors, almost all of our neighbors, not with North Macedonia, where you come from, and also with the biggest military alliance in the world, with NATO in 1999. And then these were the formative times for me and for most of civil society, getting political freedom, but being repressed and isolated. So we lived under sanctions and high economic inflation. And then we had the second transition to democracy, which was again multiple, from conflicts to peace, to more competitive democracy, more of a market economy, and trying to rejoin the EU wagon and access the EU. And then the last 12 years, we are formally on paper democracy, but we actually live in a captured state, which could be called in different ways. But the point is that public institutions, legislation, discourses are captured for the interest of the few and not for the public good. And these are very, tough situation to work on.
Sonja, let me jump in and ask you, or before I go into the question of transition, because you've used that word many times, and actually my next question about the evolution of think tanks in the region was sort of was anchored on the idea of transition. Underground, the Kusturica movie, does that have the same impact or positioning? It was one of the most watched films of the 1990s in Peru, like one of the more than Hollywood for some reason. Does that have the same did it have the same effect, of course, back home that it did in Latin America, so far away?
Yeah, it had a huge impact here, and I think it's also symbolic of how important the arts were for us. Being sanctioned under UN, not being able to travel, not being able to do things that our other people of our generation could do. Many people expressed to arts what was not available in political space. And I think Underground was one of these movies that helped us express. And also the good point at that time was that we lived on plagiarized CDs of the music. So that was the only thing we were very much in tune with the rest of the world. So the newest albums came and were sold in the streets of Belgrade, pirated. So
yeah, great. So anyway, let me go into this point of transition. You've talked about transition many times, intergenerational. You've talked about transition. Goran alluded to the point of low income to middle income status. You've talked about political transition, moving into an electoral democracy and into an electoral autocracy. Of course, that comes with funding dynamics, relationships with the West, again, changes. And I remember when we first met, a bit over a decade ago in Belgrade, um, I had the impression that the think tank scene was also transitioning from the first generation of founders and leaders to a second generation, maybe a third generation. I remember the founders of BCSP, well, these sort of well-known older guard, right? And you and your colleagues were the much younger guard, sort of coming in with new ideas. So can you tell us a little bit what has happened since that time, in the last 10 years? What were the major, most important shifts in the role of think tanks over that last decade in Serbia or in the region?
okay, can I just briefly go back to before the last 10 years? I was thinking of transitions, and this is something I've seen not just in Serbia, but in other countries I've worked in. I think the first space for think tanks, and especially for a think tank like Belgrade Center for Security Policy, that was the first to open the issue of accountability of security institutions, the first focus is detabooization of a topic and just question why? Why should we care about accountability of security institutions in the midst of war, under sanctions and so on? And this is what my predecessor and the founder of the organization, Miroslav Hadžić, and the people that established organization with him really did, and paid, by being arrested and so on, and intimidated during the autocratic time. Then when we joined, it was no longer an issue why democracy, why accountability, but more what should be done. So what kind of system we should build, and later how to do it, more about implementation. And now we are in this perverse moment where on paper we want to be democracy, but democracy is questioned and not, appreciated. And you are welcomed as long as you want to deal with policy without politics, as long as you want to deliver on implementation, as long as you want to be on a photo or create a photo opportunity for incompetent policymaker to legitimize their policy. When you ask about direction, about the consequences for the citizens, for the public goods, you are no longer welcomed, and it becomes more of conflictual status. This process has not happened overnight. This is the other big change from the old type of authoritarianism I grew up, where it was quite violent and present in the streets. We had a mask uniform, security institutions that were intimidating ordinary citizens. Now today's autocrats frequently come in power through legitimate elections, and this was also the case in Serbia. So by popular vote, and then piece by piece, gradually repurpose the institutions and legislation. And this is something that think tanks can notice and can help diagnose. But I think what I've seen in many countries is that people find it difficult to imagine how far away it can go and be tolerated. The other big difference with new authoritarianism is that it relies less on repression, or at least uses targeted repression, and more of surveillance and intimidation, which are less visible forms of repression than arrests and beating. Although recently in Serbia we have witnessed those too, but more on manufactured consent, so legitimization. And that is why the media is the first target of state capture. So taking the media and public space and also internet. So talking to people from outside, they would say, but you still have internet. Yes, you have internet, but then on internet you have trolls that are working in public administration and are paying off their clientelistic, clientelistically got job to the ruling party by trolling and creating noise so that your message on the internet would not reach the audience you want to reach. So that's a very complex and I would say perverse context to work in.
And again, so this is a transition. And so am I hearing correct? You are think tanks at some in the beginning, in the early, say the early years, they are trying to put new issues on the agenda. There's a little bit of activism, right? You have sort of to claim the space. Sort of second wave of work has to do with, okay, now we have claimed the space. What do we do with this space? How do we operate within this space? And this was a much more open space, right? Where maybe there was opportunity to work. I remember a lot of conversation, collaboration with government, collaboration with policymakers.
Yes, it
Maybe
wasn't
not ideal,
straightforward.
but not ideal,
Yes.
but more of that. And now we're moving into a watchdog resistance type role, sort of trying to avoid that full capture of the state. But let me ask you another question about the role of think tanks. And something you said just reminded me of Hans Gutbrod's report, and I don't know the order, but it's detach, distract, divide, or something like this.
Mhm.
And I wonder about the relationship of think tanks with the rest of civil society or the rest of society. And the image I had when I met you in Belgrade and I talked to the founders of BCSP and others was of a think tank very much part of that movement, part of that, in the streets with civil society. But over time, there have been a sort of a detachment from it, as you become more professional and technical and you have to, walk in the corridors of government, you have to inevitably separate a little bit. What is the relationship between think tanks and the rest of society now in Serbia and in the Western Balkans?
First, I want to say there is no monolith block of think tanks, either in Serbia or the world. So there are different options and choices for different think tankers. I would say BCSP has remained very grounded within the broader civil society, independent media space. And for us, because although we were dealing with security, but from perspective of protecting our democracy, it was very important to build relationships needed to ensure that. So for us, that meant that we fought also for the rights of employees in security institutions, so police officers, soldiers. Initially, it was through providing services to them, like legal aid, when there was a huge downsizing of armed forces after conflicts. Later, by researching what are their concerns, and as space closed, more and more whistleblowers from institutions were approaching BCSP because of its integrity and work on sensitive issues and seeing it as a legitimate channel to voice concerns about corruption, misuse of funds, repurposing, privatizing state security institutions for party causes and so on. I think as space closes, the organization, the only way to survive and to stay resilient is to find as many different types of allies. For think tank, I think we need some insiders, but there might not be politicians. There could be whistleblowers, as I said, professionals in institutions. And then also to have allies at the different levels. So for us, we became engaged again with activists because we realized that this targeted repression was going first away from the big centers, targeting environmental activists in the little villages and so on. And we thought we could borrow legitimacy by doing research and documenting it, and then looking how particularly security institutions are misused for this or not providing protection they should to civil activists or journalists. And I think think tankers should not do everything, but they could add their added value through systematizing research, through helping activists talk to international audience. We are much more proficient in this language. So I can give example. I was asked by a colleague from a feminist organization dealing with human trafficking how to approach the visit to the Brussels. And I just said, send me the agenda. And then based on who she was meeting, I was saying what to emphasize in a meeting. And for external action service, like a diplomatic service of you, I said, they don't care about gender, at least not these people you're talking to. So speak about how China is involved with labor exploitation and you'll get their ear. Here you have a member of European Parliament who's champion of gender equality, speak as much as you want about, equality and discrimination, and you'll have her ear. So these kind of things, I think think tankers can help the rest of society, and the rest of civil society can help think tankers also get access to the data when public institutions close the space to reaching good quality evidence.
Right. Well, thank you. Goran?
Thanks, Sonja. You spoke quite a lot about what you've done right, and you first worked for BCSP, then you were as director, second director, and many things went well, and the center really did amazing work in Serbia and in the region. With the benefit of a hindsight, what do you think you could have done differently? Where were the things where now when you look back, you will say, I wish we'd have done this or that,
As an organization or
as an organization?
I think as an organization, we did quite well to adapt to external environment, to do agenda setting, to create a field. I think most of the challenges were related to internal management issues. And I think it's either making some decisions too late. So I can give one example. We had a very generous core support from few donors, including the one you used to work for, and the condition was to downsize that funding every year. So in the last year of that one cycle, we didn't get to fund to find resources for additional three research posts that we had, and instead of making a tough decision to lay off maybe some people, I proposed that all our salaries, including mine, get decreased. And that, as a consequence, had that some people were frustrated with the too low of a salary at that particular point in their life when they were no longer students, but were having families, loans, and so on. And some people left the organization, not just because of salary, but, instead of making an intentional decision on who can we live without, we lost some of the precious members of staff. So that's one of examples. The other mistake was, I think, because of influence and reputation, sometimes we jumped too wide into many areas to help, and that overstretched the organization. And we can discuss more of issues.
I mean, this last point. This is a very common thing, right? If you're successful, often funders, especially if you are dependent on foreign funding, foreign funders who are not there, who sort of are risk averse, they want to go with the sure thing. They'll jump after the one they know and the one everybody knows. And it's very tempting for an organization, especially under pressure, as you described, Sonja, right, to say yes and to work on that issue as well, or to try to influence another issue because there is an opportunity. Not necessarily the case in BCSP, but it does bring us to the question of funding and funding decisions. And one of the big changes that has taken place, in the last 10 years or so, has been the kind of the funding landscape, right? And we understand, of course, that funding to the Western Balkans, especially from Western democracies, has been shrinking. Can you reflect maybe on some of the strategies that that you and your colleague at BCSP took to address the changing funding landscape,
Mhm.
in that period?
Yeah.
The things that worked, things that maybe didn't work,
Yeah.
you've learned a few
Very happy
lessons
to
from.
share mistakes too. First, I just want to say, in relation to previous question, I don't think that we follow the money and overstretch ourselves. We were more, and I think this is the biggest challenge for civil society, following the mission or this perception that it's more than a job, then it's more of a calling. And I think it's a trap, no matter how noble it is. It's important to keep healthy boundaries and not get involved in too many things. As for the funding, yes, the paradox is that as you come closer to the EU, there are fewer funders available, and the EU becomes the dominant game in town. And most of your funding is very cumbersome, administratively heavy, and also put pressures on organizations to pre-fund the EU, to kind of loan money to the EU before the reports are accepted and so on, as well to get co-funding, which I think is the biggest nightmare of all directors, to find 20-25% of co-funding from other donors that would join forces with the EU. And national funding never grew, and not especially not for us, for the sensitive topics such as accountability. What we've tried, and I think this is what we are I'm seeing also in the region, is to diversify types of EU funding. So the best EU funds you can get is academic research funding, so-called Horizon program, because there you have you get money for research, which is otherwise forbidden word in EU calls. So you cannot say I want to do research. You have to say I'm doing assessment, monitoring, this type of index or that, but research as a word is forbidden. So that's the only funding which is just for research, but for academic research. And usually envisage some engagement with policymakers, at least in Brussels, but so it's a good also advocacy channel. And it has 20% of overhead, which you don't have to justify, which is quite generous in comparison to other donors. Private foundations are more flexible with funding. And then what we've done is to jump the scale. So when the space became closed in Serbia and there were less donors available, we've led the regional level. So for whole 7 Western Balkan countries, research and joint advocacy. And that becomes more interesting to the donors that might not be in your capital, but are in the capital out there. So these were some of the things we've done. The opportunity we didn't use that much. We've provided some of the services, and I know of some organizations that set up like a sister organization to charge for services. But it's again on how many things you can manage at the same time. What we've seen is that recently, now that I'm on the board of BCSP, I've realized that some of the businesses are willing to pay significant amounts for what we are regularly doing. So, for example, political risk analysis is part of our DNA. It's something we're doing every day, and they're willing to pay 1,000, 2,000 euros for a 2-pager summary before elections, which is our bread and butter, and the air we breathe. So there is the space, and what I think is unused space at the level of our region is bringing together different sectors. So we all invested a lot of time in building relationships with politicians, civil servants, media, so to say the public part of policy. Only some economic think tanks might have worked with the business, but bringing the business together with academia, with civil society, with the government, I think there is space, not maybe straightforward, but I think some of the problems definitely need pulling not just the resources, but also the minds and exchange that we don't have. So I think that's untapped potential.
So what is that path for think tanks to become less dependent on external donors, where business, local government, even individuals get involved, and businesses don't just pay for a service or a brief, but actually say, well, actually, it's not a bad idea to invest in the existence of these organizations over the long period of time because I will need them. They will be beneficial to my space, my society. Is there a path that you can envisage that to get to that
In
position where you're less dependent on external sources?
So to say, in peaceful time, there might have been a path to build, but now in a state-captured space where the brother of a president takes over any successful IT company, the business is very much afraid to come close to anything that deals with accountability, both domestic but also international business. And we've seen in our neighboring Hungary, for example, how overnight whole industries can be nationalized. So to be disciplined, or the other businesses can get incentives, other sectors can get incentives, so to be the extended lobby hand on behalf of the government. And this is a different ballgame, as I've said. They are no longer in a war with the international community or with business. They are either capturing them through, threats of inspections and other types of intimidation, or through clientelistic, deals and giving subsidies and so on. So there is very little space to find. I think it's more at the level of individuals than companies, well, that would be willing to donate. So I think mostly people from diaspora, and then also to one of the things we were discussing in Serbian civil society, what are the healthy sectors that are not dependent on government? Is it an IT, which is, exporting their services outside? And what do they care about, and how to get them intrigued about the politics in country when their life is quite comfortable and, okay in a country. So
That's
I
interesting.
don't
So
have a solution for you, but
no,
just want to show how perverse and difficult it is.
yeah,
And
and
also the
I guess it's
advertising, the media space is used to target it, to target anybody that dares to oppose. So businesses are also targeted through smear campaigns, as think tanks are.
so as you say, this is unfortunately not the right time. And I guess a good lesson for other think tanks in other moments is that when the space is open, when there are the resources, that's also the time to start to build that local domestic interest and capacity to support think tanks and the broader ecosystem. So
Yeah.
it's time for a break. And when we return, we will explore the strategic choices that Sonja, as a leader, and the Belgrade Centre for Security Policy as a think tank, have had to make to adapt to the changing context and the need to prepare for the future. We're back after a short break. So let's continue with the question on leadership and strategic decisions. Leading a think tank for over a decade must come with stories of both successes and challenges, and failures even. And I know, Sonja, that you're quite happy to talk about failures. So would you be able to reflect on some of the key decisions that you made to ensure that your think tank maintained its relevance and impact over the years?
Mhm. I think relevance came from thinking about the context and what is needed in a context and what is to come. So we were often the first to open an issue and to name it and to give conceptual tools, both to the expert community, policy community, but also to the general audience, to think about the problems of accountability of security sector, how to approach risks of corruption in security sector. How can we use the EU accession process not just to fulfill the concerns that EU member states care about, but also to improve democracy in our country through this process and make it more resilient. So I think we were very good in that, but that also was linked to having some stability of funding. So anytime we had core funding, there was more space for innovation and experiments. And later, when the core funding disappeared, we were trying to create demand, by pulling our resources to pilot the topic, to talk about it in media, so to create demand, to get the chance to do the kind of research we want to do. And that might be also an advice to my fellow think tankers. When there is no donor that wants to support your initiative, you create one. So I'll give an example. We started with, accountability, let's make our institutions stronger. Then we realized, oh, actually corruption and what's going on below the surface is a threat. So let's go deeper and come up with solutions. And then we've seen that, there are links between crime and state, and that we need to get into research of organized crime. And there was, of course, no call to support funding for organized crime. So then we were thinking, okay, how to attract attention? Let's go regional, because just talking about Serbia is too small. And anyway, our criminal groups are interconnected and work together, smuggling drugs from Latin America to the Europe via Balkans. And then who are the major players in both the foreign policy and law enforcement that might be interested in it and that have a bit more open mind. And it took us a lot of work, not just to explain why this matters, but why would civil society be actor, be a good actor to do research on organized crime. So for many of our donors, it was a taboo to invest in security, because for ages, overseas development assistant had prohibition to invest in anything to do with security. And then for organized crime, they thought it's only police and intelligence that can deal with it. So to explain that there are things that we can do complementary or better, and that would complement their work with security institutions, it required a lot of relationship building and providing this vision with a lot of evidence. So you actually do analysis and research to create opportunity for funding. So these were some of the things that we did to maintain our independence, to set the agenda, and also, again, I would highlight building an ecosystem. So we invested a lot in educational security. So Belgrade Centre for Security Policy started the first civilian education program at the civilian political science, so to democratize the knowledge, but also a lot of programs for employees and for journalists. So in that way, you get the counterparts that demand more of it. You also might create yourself a competition. So most of our interns, and we had more than 200, ended up in other civil society organizations, government institutions, and some of whom became competitors, but at least it's a healthy ecosystem when you have plurality.
That's really interesting. And that points out also very important way in which two very important ways in which think tanks have influence. One is in setting the agenda, right? So helping explain the problem and why it's important, which often leads to that think tank playing a role in solving it. But also this building the community, building the ecosystem, building the capacities of future think tankers, decision makers, journalists, and others who will engage on these issues in the future, which is less easy to monitor and to identify as direct contribution from the think tank, but no less important and useful.
Yeah. And the third, maybe most difficult part of the work was brokering between the groups that had different interests. So I can give example of a feminist NGOs and security institutions that we brought together on a dialogue on women, peace, and security. These feminist organizations thought that most of the guys on the other side in uniform were war criminals because they were engaged in wars. And the guys in uniform thought that they were all traitors because they were advocating for peace in the time when we were in conflict. So how to create a safe space, and it was quite challenging. We had a lot of preparation, bilateral with one side, with the other side, translating the different languages because they don't use the same words for the same topics. coaching people that can, facilitate discussions. And even with all this preparation, we had a scandal at the opening of that event where a very high official came late, gave quite offensive opening remarks to the feminist organizations in a room. And I had to, in my role as a chair, stand up to him and say, you cannot do it because the way you set the tone influences the rest of debate. And it was really break it or make it, moment where half of the group would leave or not. But we've managed to create this space and to have a discussion. And these processes are even less easy to explain and invest a lot of social capital and building relationships. But I think that's where the magic happens, because you get completely different type of knowledge and a policy change and a momentum, an atmosphere. You actually get the agency and not just the solution
Right.
to what should be done.
That's very true. Very true.
And Sonja, that's also quite an important message, I would say, or even a lesson learned, because I do not see many think tanks doing that role, because usually think tanks are well positioned in the ecosystems to do the analysis, and they feel very comfortable with it, but not so often to take the action and really sort of walk the walk, because they could perfectly analyze and see what has to be done, but often it's about doing it, and I think it's absolutely impressive to hear from you that you've actually gone and have done it, and you've taken those risks associated with basically engaging as a broker or as somebody who brought antagonized parties together. Let me turn, I mean, using this really very rich conversation and the various challenges and successes you had, on the impact that all of that had as an individual. This is not only a difficult job, it requires quite a lot. You mentioned about the energy before that all of your colleagues and you yourself have put into the organization, where has been more than a job and a calling, but also the example that you used earlier on of the salary exercise, that you can have a calling when people get a salary cut. There might be different criteria that they will use for it. So all of this and probably much more, how have those things have impacted on you as an individual, and what has been the best part of your work, and what has been perhaps the most difficult or the challenging part of your role as a director of a think tank?
Mhm. So the best part of my work was definitely working with bringing new generations in on security, mentoring researchers, seeing them shine and question the ministers and talk to the EU commissioners. Also, this innovation in research and innovation in this processes, advocacy processes, bringing relationships. That's something I always enjoyed, and thinking of how we, with limited resources and a bit of technical knowledge and credibility, can play against way more powerful actors with more resources and threat of repression or other types of intimidation. The worst, I think, was neglect of private life. I don't think it's unique for think tank, but I think that's what kept me most depressed after I stepped down, was not missing any part of the job, but just taking time to remember what is it that, I would enjoy in when not working, because work spilled over into private life. You every day after work, you go to receptions to do advocacy. You hang out with colleagues who are under pressure to plan together what can you do about it. So work was very much part of private life. And the two things I would love I have done differently is kind of finding someone to do more of operational management and not to be in too many roles. And I think that's especially for think tankers, that's the one of the biggest traps that we wanna do programmatic research. We are usually quite good at doing strategic kind of fundraising and advocacy. And I also enjoyed building the organization, but I did it from practice by doing, and that requires paying a lot of price. If it wasn't for, the support that we've got from think tank fund that you led, or, on think tanks community, I think we would pay even bigger, penalties and costs. So I think learning by doing is most expensive way of learning. Sometimes it's really rich, but it costs a lot of time and mistakes. So I think what I've advised my successor, and what I think I would advise other organizations, is to see if someone else can be more of an executive management person, and maybe a specialized fundraising function. This is something we've debated for quite a long time. I'm very happy that all my research team got skills in fundraising, but just to know who is in the lead for that and who is managing that process. And um, so I think these are kind of biggest mistakes. And then I think because of my trajectory, as you mentioned, Goran, starting as one of the peers as a researcher and then getting promoted, and because of my background in, horizontal student organizing, it took me a while to accept that sometimes people like clarity and authority and not just participatory conclusions, consultations. And I don't think I was good in setting boundaries at some occasions, both for myself and for the team. But in retrospect, I don't regret it. What I would advise maybe to everyone is to find a coach or someone they can, discuss with, so not to lose this perspective.
That's interesting. Simon Maxwell used to say that being the director of a think tank was the best job in the world, but it's also an impossible job. It comes with huge amounts of challenges. Sorry, Goran, you were about to come
Yeah,
in.
no, I can only empathize with that because they're also competing priorities, and I could understand you know, almost I feel that there is a dream job description that all the directors have written, which is the job description of the operations director. It's just that people want it to to be able competently to do that work, because in particular with think tanks, it's not even if you provide the funding and whatnot, there is the challenge of finding a person who will understand also the nature of the work and will have the patience for a lot of people who actually want to care about the substance at the first place. And the other challenges. But I'm glad to hear that these are not regrets, Sonja. These are things that, uh, uh, maybe in the next iteration, maybe somewhere else, you've learned from, and probably I'm sure you will do better yeah,
Yeah,
once in a
also what
leadership
I've
position.
noticed is now I'm better positioned to help others, because I can, with the distance, help them think and say, okay, let's breathe, let's slow down, and then let's reflect and strategize and so on. Um, and I think in a closed space, and more and more the organizations are intimidated. So my successor has been put on spyware, the Pegasus, and I think it's quite common in civil society. I think this emotional breathing space becomes even bigger. And here I am not speaking about what individual can do, these well-being tips, sleep, eat, healthy and so on, but what kind of organizational practices could be designed so that there is a breathing and thinking and, sharing space within in the organization. And,
Great.
strategizing. So I love doing scenarios. I think they empower a lot.
Thank you, Sonia. I think you paint a very good picture of the more personal aspects of the role of a think tanker and a think tank leader. But I think you also point out the fact that this cannot be done on your own, right? So there are many actors, not just staff, but broader civil society, funders play a huge role in allowing for these sort of visions and missions to be delivered in a way that is sustainable. Let me go back to a bit of a lighter touch sort of question again. You've already shared really great insights about your work and your sector. And we're going to spend a lot of time thinking about how to summarize it when we transcribe and sort of dissect this interview. But maybe there's another way. So if BCSP was a song, which one would it be?
We don't have an anthem. We don't have one song. I've consulted my colleagues, and I think the common theme throughout the history of our organization was breaking fear. So any song that at a particular moment can help you break fear in confrontation with whoever is on the other side threatening the space is our song. So it could be cheerful, these boots are gonna walk all over you, or very angry, Rage Against Machine. Whenever you feel like that will help you break fear is good for us.
Great, thank you. And what about if it was an animal? Which one would it be?
Yeah, we actually have an animal in our emblem because the Belgrade Centre for Security Policy identifies very much with the capital. There is a symbol of Belgrade, which is this sculpture of Victor, which is to celebrate, winning in the First World War, and was scandalous because of the naked sculpture. And there is debate whether it's a pigeon or falcon in a hand of Victor. But what I know is that since the start, the organization always perceived democratizing security as a way to preserve peace. And at the end, I think I would not choose either falcon or pigeon, but maybe sparrow, which is a very present small bird, but very social around people, eats bad insects, and is also of our city. So, a tiny player plays some role and hangs out with other people.
And it's adaptable and nimble and it's everywhere in the
Yes,
world, right? It
yes.
adapts to every ecosystem, which is a great lesson for any think tank.
We talked a lot about the past, Sonja. In order to conclude this interview, since we're talking about lessons learned, let's talk a bit about the future. In a way, we see your country, Serbia, the region, Western Balkans, in a way, develops economically with hiccups, but struggles to become democratic. Actually, on the opposite, you described a country that has closed in that sense. What do you think will be the role of think tanks in Serbia and the Western Balkans in shaping policy in the future?
Again, I would say depending on where you come from and what you stand for, different think tanks will choose different paths. But those that care for democracy, I think, can help other players in democracy field think big. Let's think of scenarios. If we were in their shoes, what are the next steps we would take, both domestically and internationally? And then to see and use this big thinking and research to strategize with other actors and to support the actions of pro-democracy actors with relevant research and advocacy. I don't think there is going to be that much space for advocacy domestically as maybe more internationally. Uh, However, I think research can play important role in reframing issues and getting into this battle for legitimization. So for us, it was saying, that corruption kills us. For example, our Ukrainian colleagues showed that, corruption weakened defense of Ukraine during 2014 occupation of Crimea. For us, it was also that corruption kills, that corruption endangers the rights of police officers and soldiers who people want to support. And I think that's where the think tankers can be maybe not at the front face, but more of a backstage helpers to other actors in synergy to defend the democratic space.
Thank you.
And you've already given us a little bit of this, but again, looking forward, what advice would you give new think tank leaders trying to navigate this future, both contextual and of think tanks?
Find a sparring partner outside of system that you can think of, not about not about the task, but what's going on below the surface and around you. Find a community, a pack that you can be part of, with whom you can learn and share concerns. Try to keep boundaries both within the work and between your work and private life. Yeah, that would be, and everything else will fall into place. And I think empowering others in organization is a key. If a finance manager has her own or his own network, and whom to ask for and not to come to you, that's more resilient organization. So I really strongly believe in this networked way of leadership by being well embedded in ecosystem. But it's most complex too.
Thank you, Sonja. This has been it's been a pleasure to listen to you, and also, as always, a very thoughtful, not only responses but as well a provocation to think further. I'm also particularly glad that you depicted a vision of a think tank or think tanks that are more brave hearts than not, and. While of course you and I and Kiki are aware that that's not a recipe for everybody, I'm also definitely glad to hear that that's a vision that you see is successful, where the think tanks are not only brave but also they think of their efforts as a part of a maybe a complex but a broader ecosystem that then brings prosperity to a broader constituents, not only to the elites. Thank you on my part. It has been really an excellent learning opportunity for me too.
Yes, Sonja, thank you very much. It has been fantastic as always. I learn so much every time I have a chance to talk to you.
I learned from your questions, guys. You're great sparring partners, and I can't wait to hear the stories of other colleagues from the spaces that are closed or closing.
Thank you very much. The series continues with think tank leaders from across the South and Eastern Europe, and you can find the episodes wherever you listen to your podcast or visiting our website on thinktanks.org. From Goran and me, thank you very much, Sonja, and thank you everybody for listening and following.